Kids Global Movement Committee, and she will officially mark the start of this conference and tell you a little more about us. Over to you, Sheila, and thank you for your time today.
It is my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to the 5th International ICOACHKIDS Conference. The last 2 years have been very difficult for all of us, and yet you're here again from all corners of the world joining us for the next 2 evenings, proving that you're a resilient bunch and that youth sport and youth sport coaches will always bounce back regardless of the challenges they face. So to ICOACHKIDS. ICOACHKIDS is a not-for-profit global movement which promotes sport education, policy, and practice that puts children first. Our vision is a world where each and every child has access to positive, meaningful sport experiences that foster a love of sport and physical activity that will keep them involved for all of their lives. Our values reflect this. We are passionate, inclusive, informed by research, innovative, and honest. We value people and we put people first and foremost, and that's really what this whole conference is about. People, coaches, trying to make a positive impact on the lives of the young people that they coach, inspiring the leaders of tomorrow. None of this would be possible without our speakers, who have given freely of their time, their experience, and their expertise. To all of you, a really, really, really big thank you. You're such amazing people, and you're doing such amazing work and making an impact on so many. So thank you for being with us over the next 2 evenings. To all of the coaches who have joined us from over 60 countries, a huge thank you again for sharing your time and your energy and your interest with us. And you're all very welcome to the ICOACHKIDS family.
About that. £2 in the pot from me. Thank you, Sheila. For our audience members, if you have any questions for our speakers today, please ensure that you use the question and answer function available on the platform to this side of me now, and we will ask as many of your questions as we can. Also, be sure to check out our website, which is icoachkids.org, where you can register for free to learn, to coach, and to connect. Finally, follow us via our social media channels on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. All you have to simply search is ICOACHKIDS World, and make sure that you like, share, retweet, and also subscribe to grow the global movement. As you stay with us today, please post on all of those platforms using the hashtag ICOACHKIDS to continue the conversation. Now let's move on to today's conference proceedings. It's important, as we look to the future of youth sport, to embrace and celebrate such courage and optimism demonstrated, which Sheila has just described. It's also important that our youth sport coaching community continues to grow in the way that it has as it's come together over the past few years. Our presenters today will offer expert insights from both research and practical perspectives, whilst also welcoming the questions from you, our audience. In the event of any technical difficulties, please reuse the link that you have been provided, and we will get back up and running as soon as possible. But now on to our first guest. Professor Laura Lundy is co-director of the Centre for Children's Rights at Queen's University Belfast and Professor of Law in University College Cork. She is co-editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Children's Rights, and her expertise is in law and human rights with a particular focus on children's right to participate in decision-making. The Lundy model of children's participation is used extensively in practice and has been adopted by numerous national governments and public bodies and international organisations, including the European Commission, WHO, and UNICEF. Laura, welcome to the ICOACHKIDS conference.
Thank you very much. Greetings to everyone attending the conference, and thank you to ICOACHKIDS for the invitation to present. I'm delighted to be here and to talk about how to engage children in youth sport. As I said there, my background is in law and human rights, and particularly children's rights. And I think that most of you will be familiar with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. I can tell you that wherever you are in the world, unless you're in the United States, your country has ratified this convention, and that means that your government has agreed that it will obey by every provision in that convention. And if you're in the United States, I think you should know that actually the United States has a very strong history and tradition of protecting freedom of expression, including for children and young people. So this is the official UNICEF child-friendly version of the convention. And I have highlighted one particular provision, and that's Article 12. Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is summarized here for children as saying that they are entitled to respect for their views. And that's what I'm going to focus my talk on, Article 12.1. So this is the text of the provision, and you might have heard of the convention, and you might even have heard of this provision, but you probably won't be able to recite this particular article word for word. It's a complicated provision because it was a contested provision. But what it does is it says that states parties, who are all our governments, are required to ensure that a child who's capable of expressing a view is entitled to have that view given due weight in accordance with age and maturity. Okay, that's Article 12, and I'm going to focus on that in my talk. One of the most important things to know about Article 12 is that it's a standalone right. Children are entitled to be heard when they want to speak if they have a view on anything. But from a children and youth rights perspective, what's also really important is that it's considered to be a cross-cutting principle for all children's human rights. And what we know is that particularly in sport with children, there has been a lot of focus and attention on safeguarding and child protection in the wake of historic child abuse and concerns about keeping children safe. And I want to make one point about that because it's not the focus of my talk today. And the point I want to make is this: you cannot keep children safe unless you listen to them and you involve them. We know that across all domains of children's life. So children's right to be protected from harm in Article 19 needs us to be listening to them as in complying with Article 12. But I also want to say that there are a number of other children's human rights that are really relevant to coaching and to youth sport, in particular the right to play and leisure and rest, the right to health, the right to education, which focuses on physical development, and also the right to development itself. So what we know is you cannot deliver any of these substantive human rights unless you also deliver Article 12, that we seek children's views and we take them seriously. One final point before I start to talk about the Lundy model, and that is that what we know now, it was unclear at the start, is that this right applies both to individual and collective participation. What does that mean? It means that when decisions are made that affect only one child, an individual child, it applies, but also when decisions are made that are affecting groups of children, perhaps a team or perhaps a whole sport, that is also a right of groups of children. They are entitled to have their views sought and taken seriously. So examples of decisions that might affect individual children, this will depend very much on your own context, but we think of things like children's views on what position they play, whether they play at all, what sport they play. These are all individual decisions that are sometimes made for children and not with children. And Article 12 says that when these are happening, we should be checking in with children. What do they want? Why do they want it? What can we do or what can't we do? And then secondly, decisions affecting groups of children. And these decisions have a huge variety. This can actually mean something like national policy. We saw it during COVID, we're seeing during COVID, the initial lockdowns, children's sport was stopped. Children felt incredibly strongly about that. We know, we did a study on it. And that means what that means is that governments should be consulting children in national policy, for instance, during those lockdowns, about what they could do to ensure that children could still keep up with their sports. It could mean that it's actually just about team policies or club policies. I've already mentioned the safeguarding policy. Children should be involved wherever money is spent. If we're deciding where money is spent, can we give children their own budget? Not just about kit, although kit is really important, and also within their teams. perhaps within their teams, about who's playing, when they're playing, which fixtures, which leagues. These are all decisions that are affecting them as a group, and they're entitled to be heard. So coming on to my journey, that's just a little bit of context about the idea that this is a human right. So for me, it goes back 17 years. And as I said, I'm a lawyer, and I was obviously familiar with the legal text of Article 12. But in a research study that I conducted then, and many research studies since, what I've realized is that what the text requires, what adults understand it to be, and what children experience can be three different things. So I'm going to talk about the text in a minute. But what adults understand often is, whenever I talk to adults in research projects or in practice, they will often say, well, yes, no, we do that. We listen to children. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, we do. The voice of the child is really important, in our practice. And then when we talk to children in the same context, what they tell us often is actually no one asks for their views. Whenever their views are asked for, that often nothing happens, or they aren't told what has happened to their views. Or if they aren't asked for their views and they offer their views, this is what I want, that sometimes they're considered to be being cheeky, to be challenging authority, and that can have negative consequences for them. So we had this disconnect, and we still have this disconnect between what the obligation is and what adults think they're doing and what children actually experience. And so this took me to where I came up with the Lundy model, although I didn't know it was going to be called that. And that is, I started to question this idea of the voice of the child and the various abbreviations that adults were using when they were delivering this human right, whether it was the voice of the child, the right to be heard, or the right to have a say. And I concluded that each of them was really an imperfect summary that could potentially undermine implementation of this important human right. And what I suggested then was that voice is not enough. We've really got to get past this idea of voice, or even engagement, which is the title of my talk. And that if we want to deliver this human right, that we have to have space, voice, audience, and influence. So in space, we have to create the conditions where children feel safe, that are inclusive. In voice, we have to facilitate children, not only to express themselves, but sometimes to come to a view. Audience, we need to know where their views are going, and that person needs to have authority to effect change. And finally, influence, that their views have to be given due weight as appropriate. Those are the four elements of the model. The most recent version of it, it's been used a lot, but the most recent version was one that I got to work on with the Irish government last year, largely during lockdown. And they have a national strategy on child and youth participation. So every government department has actions, lots of actions around sport and leisure. But also they now have a national framework. And this was developed with children and young people, but also with people out in practice, including those working in youth clubs and in sports clubs. And what they said is that if we're going to put the Lundy model into practice, what we need is an everyday spaces. We need a guidance, and we come up with this set of questions that you can ask around space, voice, audience, and influence. I'm not going to go into them in detail because you can get links to all of this. But for instance, it's really important in space that it's a safe space, that it's an inclusive space. We always need to be asking who's not talking, who's not in this conversation, and how do we get them in? In voice, we have to work with understanding. Do they understand the issues? Can we give them choices? Because they might not have a view until they've time to form one. Audience, as I've mentioned, is about really ensuring that you're giving children the impression that you are taking them seriously, and often adults don't. And they do that often because they rush away or they don't take the time. And then influence, understanding what actually happens to views. And I'm going to come back to that one. That's in this national strategy, there's an example of being used for national policy. Again, I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but one of the things that I really like in these checklists is the emphasis, which came from staff and children, is that you must allow sufficient time. Time is really important to children and young people. And the final tool that's in that checklist is a little tool designed by children themselves, which can be used to check if they felt heard. And all of these tools, the Irish government has been very generous, and everyone can pick them and adapt them in their own context. So I just want to show two examples of them being used, a kind of cascading down from the national strategy. And Sheila Quinn spoke earlier, and this is part of her work. This is from Sports Ireland. And I really like this guide that they have put together, because what happens with the Lundy model is people are able to take it and make it their own. And I really like in this guide, there are lots of practical tips for how to do this through votes and polls with children in clubs and sports, but it acknowledges the context of youth sport. which is often very hierarchical. And that's not, sport's not the only place to be hierarchical, but we need to acknowledge that there are cultures where children are listened to and there are cultures where it's harder. And I'm sure that varies by sport. I don't know all of that, but I'm sure you do yourselves. And I just like the fact that it's acknowledging that and saying, well, what actually can be done? And again, this guide emphasizes time. Another just specific example from Ireland, this is flown down from the national strategy, comes from Swim Ireland. And again, there's Swim Ireland making it their own, in terms of the model. They're looking at where does it happen? And actually in Swim Ireland, it could be happening poolside, it could be happening inside, it could be happening outside. And you can see that in this guide, they're looking at the circumstances, the space and the opportunities, and they're trying to make it feasible for themselves to engage with the children whom they coach. Okay, so how do we get, this is the ultimate holy grail of child participation, youth engagement. How do we make sure there's influence? This is what children tell us. My views were taken, but I don't know what happened to them. And in my latest work, I've been emphasizing how important it is that there is feedback, and not just any old feedback, that we give children really detailed, fast, full, friendly, and followed up feedback. And I'm particularly interested in what's full. And in full, I've suggested that whenever you've taken children's views, take the time then to tell them what has happened, what you agreed with, what surprised you, why did it surprise you, what are you going to do, what are you not going to do? Crucially, if you cannot do it, explain to children and young people why it's not possible. Is it money? Is it time? Is it resource? Is it a safety issue? Because often they don't understand, they just know they wanted this and it didn't happen, and that can be frustrating and disappointing and can put them off. So feedback is crucial. It's a critical juncture in a participatory dialogue. And you're engaging in young people, it's that follow-up accountability, which is the heart of all human rights. Final example from practice then is that, this is a really lovely example from England. It's Salisbury Rovers Football Club. They've been doing amazing work. And what I really love about their work is they have grounded this not just in Article 12, but in a full child rights process. And what they are doing is really engaging with the right to have a say, the right to be heard in Article 12, along with their play and their leisure. They have lots of child-led activities. They have lots of children, very young children, really inclusive of very young children, direct to the kind of training and coaching they want in football, which might actually be football golf. And they have a great website which has lots of videos showing what they do. And I strongly commend it to you as an example of good practice. So finally, and this is my final slide, when you talk about youth participation in sport, it's often about taking part, as Sheila said, and you've got this concern that they're stopping taking part. And Sheila made the strong argument that, what can we do to stop children stopping doing sport? And of course, one way to do that is to find out what's going to keep them there and what's putting them off. And you can only do that by engaging with them. And if you're going to have that kind of child participation, it has to be participation with purpose. This is what the Irish strategy is based on. And that means you're actually talking to them, not just for the sake of it, but with the absolute intention, whether that's one individual child, the team, the club, or the national policy. It's actually to bring about change and to engage children's views in that, to shape the sport that they want to do. Because they have a right to be heard on all matters affecting them. And we know that sports and their clubs really, really matter to them. So thank you very much for that. And I'm looking forward to your questions.
Laura, thank you so much for your insights. And 15 minutes is never quite enough to just get our teeth into just how amazing this model is. So thank you for sharing that with us. We have some questions from our audience, and we've got time for a couple. One of the questions that have been asked is, what seem to be the biggest barriers for the voice of children and young people to be heard in general and specifically in sport?
So I think I just touched on it there, and I picked it up, not that I know this, but I picked it up from reading around for this presentation. Biggest barrier generally is often a culture where we don't actually engage with children, that it's just not been a done thing. It's been if there's been a context where adults make decisions and are used to making decisions and think they know best, and often they do know best. What a rights-based approach is not about is handing over decision-making to children, unless that's the right thing to do in a particular instance. It's ensuring that decisions are made in a joint dialogue. And all human rights come from the idea that we all have the right to dignity, equality, and respect for our worth. And it's making sure that adults start to see the child in the team or the child they're coaching as this human being entitled to dignity, respect, and worth. And that means self-determination. You know, none of us would accept being told in our sports what we could or couldn't do. And we're building children's capacity to make, you know, good decisions. And we can only do that by starting to ask them what they want, engaging with them, doing what they want, or when we're not doing what they want, then explaining to them why we cannot. But it's always about involving them and changing that culture where adults decide and then tell children, this is what's going to happen.
And I wonder, when we start to talk about things like the child gaining autonomy, that are there many instances where at first the child will almost repeat what the adult says in order to give them what they think they want to hear? And as such, does time equally apply to the adult as well, in terms of being patient with slowly scaffolding an appropriate environment?
Gary, that's a great way of putting it. And again, that's not just, you know, unique to sport. That happens everywhere. And sometimes children will want to please. I mean, they love their coaches, they respect them, they will want to please them and do what they're suggesting. So I think it requires the skill set and mindset to come to the child and say, well, you have choices here. Here's some choices. We could do A or B or C. Here's the advantages and disadvantages. This might work, might not work. And then letting children gradually make more and more choices, maybe to the point where they're actually have quite a lot of autonomy later on within their own clubs or their sports or their decision making. But you're right, scaffolding is a good way to describe it. And it fits with a rights-based approach, which is building their capacity to understand the issues as well.
Laura, thank you so much. I wish we had more time for questions, but off the back of this work, I would really like to welcome back Sheila Quinn, who has some really exciting ICOACHKIDS news to share with our audience.
I think I owe €2 now as well, because I've done it too. So first of all, Laura, thank you so much for your insightful presentation. And I think I should really point out, I can't take credit for the work done in Sport Ireland. That was done by our ethics unit and is currently led by Michael Collins. But what we really did want to say today in front of everyone is that the ICOACHKIDS movement was really only established in March 21. And one of our main goals for 2022 is to increase the representation of young people. And to this effect, we're hereby committing to the creation of an ICOACHKIDS Youth Council, following the framework that Laura has described and the fantastic work that she's done. The ICOACHKIDS Youth Council will ensure that young people have a voice. They have the space to have that voice heard, in the knowledge that their views will shape the future direction of the ICOACHKIDS movement. Please watch this space during 2022, because we intend to ensure that by the end we have a youth council in existence. And thanks again to Laura for not only her inspiration, but also for the model and for the tools which will allow us to engage in a meaningful way with the young people involved in sports every day. So thank you so much for your presentation and also the inspiration. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Sheila. There's certainly some really exciting times ahead for the global movement. Some awesome news. And now we move on to our next guest. Amanda Visek, PhD, is an associate professor in the Department of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences at the George Washington University's Milken Institute of Public Health in Washington, D.C., in the United States of America. Her application of group concept mapping for identifying and quantifying determinants of fun in youth sport, aptly named Fun Maps, have been enthusiastically received worldwide among sport organisations and scientifically rigorous, meaningful and practical athlete-centred framework that is informing coach education, impacting the delivery of sports programmes and shaping policy. Her work is headlined nationally in USA Today, The Washington Post, Huffington Post, ESPNW, US News, and many, many more. And it's an absolute privilege to be welcoming you, Amanda, today. Welcome to the ICOACHKIDS conference.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. And what a great segue to follow Dr. Laura Lundy and all her work around ensuring children's voices are represented. It's my pleasure to be here today, and I hope to show you some of the really innovative ways in which we are leveraging children's voices through research. So to start, I want to start first by acknowledging the paradox in this space when we talk about fun and what it means to children. And so in doing this, actually, I should take a step back and kind of talk just for a moment here and get the clicker to work. About where I am right now, actually. I was introduced as being from George Washington University in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, and I am actually here in Sweden right now on sabbatical. And I've spent the last couple of months working at the Swedish Ice Hockey Association. And so what I'll be doing today is sharing some of the foundational work that I did and some of the work that we've been doing together over the last couple of years, and helping the audience envision a pathway to coaching fun through player development. So I want to start first by acknowledging what fun means to young children and the paradox that it has with this concept of competing. And so if we juxtapose fun and competing along the performance and participation pyramid that we often see in many sports, and this is a visual representation of what it looks like at the Swedish Ice Hockey Association. And so in looking at this, one of the things that we know is that at the very early stages of development, particularly when we talk about early, and there's this emphasis on fun, right? And the concept that fun is a critical component to children's participation. And as they move up in their athletic development, essentially what happens is the conversation and the discourse around the word fun begins to change. And so now suddenly fun is not so integral to development and performance, and it seems to take a back seat in this way. And what is quite interesting is that when we sort of juxtapose the discourse of how we talk about fun and the focus of it in early development versus later development, we see a corresponding shift in retention versus dropout. And so when this conversation starts to change in this way, again, we see this corresponding dropout in terms of participation. So to further complicate things, we talk about fun and this idea that fun is not synonymous with competition or competing. The other sort of ways in which fun takes on a meaning of its own is these other sort of, meanings or associations that get attached to the word. So in this way, very often adults talk about how fun is synonymous with goofing off and horsing around. The other is oftentimes you ask coaches, how do you know when your athletes are having fun? They talk about, being able to count how many of them are smiling or laughing. And the other is that, here in Sweden, there's this sort of Swedish fika culture where we associate fun with taking a break and sitting around the table with coffee or treats and friends. And in the sport context, it takes on its own meaning, oftentimes in coaching practices and training, where we tend to leave fun for the end of the practice or training. So if the players have done really well at working hard and competing and giving it their all in training, then we'll allow them some time at the end to have fun. And so these different definitions of what fun means really sort of complicate this concept. When we look at the literature, we know that is so pivotal to children's involvement, both at early development levels and even for those at the Olympic level who pursue the highest level of their sport. And so in this way, what we sought to do, very consistent with what Dr. Lundy was talking about earlier, is we sought to, the clicker to reconnect. Here we go. My apologies. We sought to really understand what does fun really mean to players. And the idea here was to leverage their voices through really rigorous research that we have been doing. So to kind of take you through this, and just if I go back here as well, I just want to point out that there's the QR code up in the top right-hand corner. So if you use the QR code, it will take you directly to the publicly available research article for you. So in this study that this foundational study that we did, we engaged players, both girls and boys, across younger and older age groups, U9 all the way up to U19. And we also included those players in the United States in the sport of soccer who are playing at both the recreational as well as the travel, more select elite levels of the sport as well. And in doing this, we asked them all to brainstorm all the things that make playing sport fun. And in doing this, they came up with thousands of different ideas. And when we took this back and we analyzed it, we found that in total, they identified 81 very specific determinants of fun. So I repeat that again, 81 very specific determinants of fun. We then asked them to sort all of these 81 determinants. So we placed each one on its own index card, and each player sat with their own deck of cards and they sorted them in a way that made sense to them. We also asked them as they were sorting to then name their piles as well. So as they were sorting the cards, they were given Post-its and a pen and asked to name each of the piles in their own words. After which, we then asked them to rate all 81 fun determinants on a scale of 1 to 5, from not as important all the way up to extremely important. And so what's really nice is that when you take all of these players' input, their brainstorming data, the 81 determinants of fun, their sorting and their rating, we are able to aggregate this in a visual way that maps what fun looks like inside the mind of a young athlete. And it looks like this. So you can see games and practices that are at the center of the map here. And then I'll draw your attention over to the right-hand side of the map. We have learning and improving, trying hard, and mental bonuses. So if you were able to sort of look inside trying hard, each of these data points then corresponds to one of the 81 fun determinants. So data points here, these fun determinants, the black dots, that were sorted together more often appear closer on the map. And we can juxtapose that with those determinants that were sorted together less often will appear further apart on the map here. So what we can see is that we have on the right-hand side here, all the internal determinants. Up at the top, you can see the social determinants, team rituals, team friendships, positive team dynamics, followed by swag, game time support, and positive coaching. And like I said before, we can zero in on each of these sort of fun factors, these 11 factors, to take a closer look at the determinants within them. So here takes the entire study that we did and maps it in an infographic form so that you can see the entire thing. And basically what you're seeing here are all of the 11 fun factors in order of most important to less important, and then each of the specific fun determinants in order from most important to less important as well. And so what's really important to note here is that when we talk about what makes playing sport fun for players, at the heart and center of this is player development. So if you look at the top rated fun factors of trying hard, positive team dynamics, as well as positive coaching, learning and improving, games and practices, this is all very task-oriented, development-driven determinants. So a natural question that comes up next is, what are their fun priorities? And so we took a look at this and looked at and compared them by sex, age, and playing level. And so what you see here is a comparison of girls and boys that participated in the study. And you can see very clearly that they rated those of primary importance, secondary importance, as well as tertiary importance exactly the same. When we look at age comparison, the younger U9 players to the older U14 to U19 players, again, the data looks exactly the same. And then finally, when we look at playing level comparison and we compare recreational to travel players, the data again look exactly the same. So what this is telling us is that these players, what makes it fun for them is more uniformly the same than it is different. We also did a similar study here in Sweden that looks at what does fun really mean to these players and conducted focus group interviews throughout the country. And what we found as well is that it looks very, very similar. So this is the Swedish Fun Map based upon the qualitative interviews that we did with, I think it was 58 Swedish youth throughout the country. And what we notice here is that in the United States, we can see 81 determinants of fun that came from the foundational seminal study. And then here we have 84 determinants of fun in Sweden. And so there are some interesting cross-cultural nuances there. So what this has allowed us to do is, between these studies that we've done so far and these databases of really rich research between the United States and Sweden, is move towards a much more uniform definition of what fun is. And so if you open up the dictionary to any word, we can see the origin and etymology of it. And here it's based in science when it comes to fun. And so when we hear young athletes say, I play because it's fun, the game was the most fun I've had all season, they are a really fun coach, now we have an understanding of what that actually means to them. And when they talk about fun, they mean that it is a positive, task-oriented, multimodal sensory experience that we know from the literature so far, which is really rich. It has a lasting effect on players' athletic development, their motivation, as well as their retention. Finally, very quickly, I just want to show you, we also did a follow-up study in the United States looking at comparing coaches and players to one another. And so what is interesting to see here is that when we compare the younger players with the coaches that coach them, there is an overwhelming correspondence in the coach's understanding of what makes sport fun for them. When we look here at the older athletes, we have U14 to U19 compared to their coaches, and we can see here that that decreases dramatically. And so what I'd like to do here is just take a moment to take this in, and then we'll juxtapose it back to the problem that we started with in terms of how this understanding of fun shifts with this corresponding dropout in participation. So the challenge here is, how do we then adopt a universal understanding of fun so that we can retain a greater number of players in sport? So one of the ways in which we've been trying to do this is by getting coaches to really understand what a fun experience is. And so very quickly, I can tell you that when we talk about experience, we're talking about an instance of personally encountering or undergoing something. And the way in which we do this very often is through our five senses. So our lived experiences are through touching, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting. That's how we experience the world around us. If we take away any one of these five senses, our lived experience changes dramatically. So we can also juxtapose this experience, this fun experience, and go back to this operational definition of what fun means to children. And we can break it down into five sensory experiences by which coaches can make it fun. And the coaches can do this by concentrating on the environmental aspects of what having fun means. So in this 5 sensory model that you see here, the examples that are given across environmental, physical, verbal, emotional, and social correspond directly with both the Swedish Fun Maps and the original Fun Maps. And they give very precise actions and directions around how to create the physical aspect of having fun, the verbal aspect, how coaches touch the emotions of the young athletes that we're working with through their words as well as through their actions. And then socially, how do we construct this experience as well? And so finally, that is all the time that we have today. And I just want to thank my colleagues at the Swedish Ice Hockey Federation, Anders and John Lind, as well as Andreas Iversen at Halmstad University, who have all been very integral in moving this work forward.
Amanda, thank you so much for some further insight into the fun mapping. I have 1,000,001 questions, but so do our audience. So I won't be selfish, and I'll lean on some of the questions that they have. Really interesting there that when you were speaking about the determinants of fun, that they seem to be task oriented. We
Yes.
have Andrew asking in the audience about the importance of trying hard. So how do we help coaches recognize that trying hard is something that children find to be fun? And is there a metric to help them observe that, to help them see that?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. I mean, one of the ways that we can see this is also simply through observation as coaches. Are they working hard? Does it feel like they are giving their best? Are we giving them opportunities to compete? And so when we look at the sort of infographic there, and I apologize because unless it's blown up on the screen, it's very difficult to see. But trying hard is defined by working hard, exercising, being active. These are, when it comes to the movement and physicality on the ice or on a court, these are things that coaches have some degree of control over. And how we construct those competition and those practice environments in a way that give them opportunity to compete, that give them more touches on the ball, more touches on the puck, then we can bring out this aspect of trying hard, this really sort of intrinsic motivation, if you will.
I wonder then, in helping the coach to understand and hear their players, their athletes a little more, is it possible for coaches to engage in creating the fun maps themselves?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I encourage both coaches and parents to do as well is to check in, right? And so we can use the research that we have here in order to help guide coaches in their evidence-informed practice and their coaching tactics. But a really good daily practice to do is to check in with your athletes and get feedback from them and ask them, did they have fun? And if they say yes, follow up by asking them, well, what was fun? What made it the most fun? What would you want to do the next day? If they tell you, not so much fun today, coach, then that's really good information to know as well. And then being able to follow up with them and say, well, what would you change? Or what didn't you like and why didn't you like it? Right? That's really about soliciting the input and the feedback from the players, from the children who this experience is intended for, right? So it goes very much back to everything that Dr. Lundy said in the first part of this conversation as well.
And I guess that really resonating comment there is kind of going beyond that. Yes. Did you have fun? Yes. Tell me more. Create an opportunity for the children to be heard in that instance. Amanda, thank you so much for your time. I'm afraid we've run out of time this evening, but I'm sure if you stick around, there's plenty of questions still coming in the chat. So thank you so much for spending your evening with us.
Thank you.
And now to move on to our next guest. Hannah Crane is part of the senior leadership team at Street Games. As Director of People and Partnerships, Hannah leads on Street Games strategy in relation to workforce, youth development, and health and well-being. After working in finance and then the skills, training and education industry, Hannah moved to work into sport and has specialised in community sport, supporting partners to respond to policy and increase on traditional participation. In addition, Hannah volunteers as a youth mentor for the London Borough of Sutton, a youth leader for Girl Guiding, and is a trustee for Girl Guiding London South West and the Sport for Development Coalition. Hannah, welcome to the ICOACHKIDS conference.
Hi, Gary. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and excellent speakers so far. So I feel very pleased to be part of your event. So as Gary said, my name's Hannah Crane. I am the Director of People and Partnerships at Street Games, and I'm here to talk to you really about the core of what Street Games does, why it exists, and how we operate. And really that does focus on putting young people at the heart of your sports delivery. So hopefully a really good fit with what Laura and Amanda have already said. So I'm going to talk, as I say, about why Street Games exists. So we've been around for about 15 years now, and our core purpose is to try and reduce the inequality of participation between those young people who live in our most underserved communities across the UK and their more affluent peers. And unfortunately, over the last few decades, there hasn't been much change. Those young people who do live in those areas, we describe them as underserved communities, but sometimes they're called disadvantaged communities, and they are chiefly made up of families who are from low income backgrounds. They are young people who grow up in those areas are half as likely to be regularly active. They're half as likely to receive coaching. They're half as likely to volunteer. And they're half as likely to be taking part in any kind of sport outside of school. So that is really a big gap, and obviously a significant thing we're looking to address. And we talk very much about our end game. I'm giving you a few snapshot slides here of our new strategy, which is due to be published in the next few weeks. But our end game is really focused on that idea of making sure all those young people in the underserved communities that we support have access to sport, and that they have the opportunity to play whatever sport it is that they like. That it isn't just about one size fits all, and that in the long run, they have the opportunity to take their sport to whatever level it is that suits them, that they want to take part in. And in particular, that there is a year-round offer close enough to home to make it easy to access. Because in fact, not having something within a mile of your home is one of the biggest barriers that young people in the UK talk about in terms of access to sport. So about how we do it. So we work with a whole network of what we describe as locally trusted organisations. Those are really important words there. So local, ideally within a mile of where young people are living, although some people will travel further. Trusted, so they need to be organisations that the young people feel trust in, but also that their parents or the community trusts. So quite often they're organisations that have been around a while or are led by people who they already know. And we've got a real mixture of who those locally trusted organisations are across Street Games. And again, that's really crucial because, as already been touched, there's no one size fits all for young people. They need to go and take part in sport in organisations and in places that are their choice, that fit them. So these organisations are, this is a kind of brief makeup of what our network looks like. We have about 1,600 locally trusted organisations that affiliate with us across the UK. Biggest number of those are charitable trusts, as you can see, but some constituted clubs who are also registered with the National Governing Bodies of Sport in the UK, as well as education bodies, our local authorities, and community interest companies. So a really good mix. And those organisations all have a few things in common, and it's those things that are in particular important to us. So they all work to deliver physical activity to those young people in those areas of underserved communities. And they all take part and join what we would describe really as a movement. And we talk about our kind of approach to community development as asset-based community development. Lots of you will have come across that in many places. But in particular, we talk about that in how you deliver good quality sport to young people. So I've talked about the why and a little bit of the how, but what do we mean when we're talking about high quality sport to young people? So we use the phrase doorstep sport, and it's really, really specific, although it doesn't at all mean that you have to be involved with anything Street Games does to be doing it. Doorstep sport is about the methodology that you use when you're delivering your sport. So as you can see at the center of this diagram is young people. So your audience and your young people are the center of what you do, and they are the start point for everything you plan. So really good to hear both Laura and Amanda talk about exactly that, about youth voice and about what young people want from sport being the center, because that has to be where you begin. We then talk, as you can see, hopefully a little bit clearly, but I can share these slides afterwards. So the outer ring then is about the organisation, and as I say, the key elements of that organisation to enable that really good quality doorstep sport to take part. So first of all, at the top there, we talk about partnerships. So no organisation can do this and reach the audience it wants to on its own. You need to form really strong partnerships in your local area. We talk there about the ethos of an organisation, so putting young people at the heart and making youth voice central to what you do. About being stable and trusted. So as I say, those organisations need to have been around for a while, or they need to have been formed and be worked at by people who are from the community you're trying to work in. And then right staff, which links directly on. So who is running the sessions, who's leading the organisations is absolutely central. And if they don't connect with the young people, then nothing you put on will work. And then into the key elements. So again, chiming with what some of our speakers have already said, but young people come to sessions for a number of different reasons. They're looking for different things, but in the main, all of our young people will, I'm sorry, I'm working from home and my cat's making noise. Stop it. All of our young people share these key elements about what it is they want. They want rewards and rewarding sport. So what does that mean in this context? They want to see themselves developing. They might not want to have the best forehand in the country, but they do want to see themselves getting a little bit better. And so quite often that's just comparing themselves against their own development, not even about each other. They want personal development. So actually lots of young people talk about their interest and need and using sport to broaden other areas of their lives. They also want a year-round offer. So actually most young people want something that they can come back to time and time again. They don't necessarily want something that just pops in for a few weeks and then disappears again. So all of those elements around the outside are for us about good quality doorstep sport. And they are what makes any community and any young person healthier, safer and more successful, which is our central ethos and the purpose of sport for us. But a little bit more in terms of what that technically means. And I hope you can see these photos because they mean a lot to me, because they're about the young people we work with and they're in the communities that we support. So we talk about doorstep sport being made up of the 5 rights. And so very, very by definition, how you get something right is entirely determined by the audience. So we talk about the 5 rights as the right time, the right place, the right price, the right style, and the right people. And those rights will be different for everyone. So I've given a few examples here because I think sometimes understanding your audience and getting things right involves a little bit of thinking outside the box. So that first picture at the top there, which is the mums pushing the buggies, this was all about the right time. If you're looking to engage busy mums And we work a lot with teenage mums who are under a lot of pressure from very different, lots of different things are happening in their lives. Then actually you need to make it as easy for them to build in their physical activity to their existing daily routine. So this mums club met at the school gates, and they went for their walk, which turned into running later on from the school gates, because all those mums had to be there at 8:45 to do the drop off every morning anyway. So all you were doing is making that journey to and from school a little bit longer. You weren't asking them to leave the house again. You weren't asking them to get dressed again differently. It was all about making it as easy for them and fitting into their daytime activities already. Right place. So I don't know what you would perceive that picture bottom left of your screen to be, but that clearly is a golf course. I can't imagine you would think it's anything else. So right place is about being creative with the spaces that you use. So that you might think it's a car park with a lot of bins and skips in it, but I would say that's a golf course, and one of the best in the country, I'm sure. So this particular project, they had a group of young people, and you can see, if you look closely at the back of that picture, there's a football pitch, and then behind that there's some trees, and right there was a golf club, but a golf club that these young people never thought was going to welcome them and never thought they were going to get into. So they worked with their youth workers, and they designed their own mini golf club. And of course, this was not only was it inspiring and wonderful for them, but it persuaded the local golf club to work a little bit more with this youth centre. But here they are creating their own golf club in the space that was theirs. So they were able to use this car park because this was at a time when the centre was shut, where they would meet. So they could use the car park. They found random things around that they could access and use either for free, or people were happy to let them borrow. And then they created their own golf course. So that place was safe for them. It felt safe and it felt like theirs. And so that's why that was the right place. Next one's about price. So these young people live in that housing block at the back of the picture, but they play sport on that beach because it's free to walk onto that beach. And so as soon as you deliver activity on that beach, you're removing any venue costs from your costs. So it doesn't remove all costs, but it makes it as cheap as it possibly can. And when you're thinking about reaching young people from those communities, you need to make it as cheap as you can. In the UK, the most recent piece of research that was published at the end of 2020 told us that families have on average £3.21 to spend on sport per week for the whole family. So if your session is £1 or £2, you're already at risk of eating up most of the budget that family has. And as soon as you go above that, you're excluding any family that's got more than one child. You're excluding parents from doing whatever they're doing. So as cheap as you possibly can when you're working with these families. Right people. So that is a group of dancers from Leeds, and they set up their own dance group, a group of girls who wanted to dance, couldn't find anywhere locally to do it, started working with a youth centre, and they've been running a good few years now, run a very successful dance movement, which last year, in fact, during lockdown in the UK, included dancing in the streets, where they would have an instructor stand in the middle of the street, and they would find spaces where the girls could stand in gardens or distance from each other in the housing estate so that they could all dance. So right people, that drive, that commitment to do something different. And for those young people to feel connected to that individual, it's absolutely key. And then the last right is right style. And this is one of my all-time favorite pictures, because some people don't notice what's a bit odd about this picture. But if you're canny, you'll have spotted that there's this young footballer on the right-hand side is carrying her handbag. And I can only imagine, for those of you coached this sport, are now listing the risk assessment issues and the health and safety problems with it. But what I see is a young woman who on that day had stuff going on in her life that meant she couldn't put that handbag down. She didn't feel safe leaving it. She didn't feel safe leaving it, and she didn't want to put it down. And what happened is that the coach adapted the game. They talked about how they made this okay for this girl to take part, and then they managed it. So this young lady who might otherwise have been excluded from a really important day for her, as you can see, these guys are in uniform. This was a competition that they'd managed to get through from their community group. They found a way to make it work. And that's right style, finding whatever it is that makes it work for those young people. I won't talk to this last slide, but I think the slides will get shared afterwards. But just a little bit of a synopsis there about what doorstep sport is and what it means. And just to echo what's already been said today, we specialise in that in young people aged 5 to 24, but actually really specifically around young people who don't have a positive experience of sport, certainly don't necessarily take part of sport outside of school and outside of those compulsory spaces, and in particular with teenagers who are high risk of dropout, of taking part not at all, let alone only rarely. So that doorstep sport methodology is built on those principles of engaging those who are least able, least likely to engage. I hope it wasn't too whistle-stop tour for you. I'll leave my details there. If anyone does want to get in contact and ask any questions, please do. As I say, our strategy will be published in the next few weeks, and it will be full of that type of information, and all of our research and insight is on our website and available for free. So please do, if we can be of use or service to you, please do let me know.
Hannah, thank you so much for not only your overview of doorstep sport, but for bringing it to life with such rich stories that are grounded in what is going on currently within your organisation. It's also really important to just really emphasise that sport happens not only in the lines of the pitch or the court, but beyond. And it was certainly reassuring to me that a car park can be a golf course, because far too many of my shots end up there. So hopefully there is a space in that sport for me. One of the questions that has come in from our audience has asked, are some sports better suited to being doorstep sports?
Oh, great question. So actually, we focus quite a lot of our work on helping traditional sports work with young people who they might not otherwise reach, but also trying to make sure that young people have access to any sport they like. We very much come from the ethos of, if you're prepared to be flexible, then any sport works in this space. But it does require some thinking through, and we've had some brilliant debates over the years of, can you play cricket but not with a cricket bat? And can you play volleyball but without a net? And our answer is always yes. You've just got to find a creative way of managing it. So we would say any sport. But of course, the jumpers for goalposts, etc., make some sports easier to translate with very little equipment. But anything and everything.
And I noticed there the partnership with Sport England. We've had a question asking, is there a doorstep sport initiative in other parts of the UK?
Yes, so we cover the whole of the UK. Yeah, well, good question, actually. We cover the whole of the UK. The bulk of our work is in England and Wales. Of our 1,600 or so organisations, I'd say probably 1,500 are in England and Wales. We do a little bit in Scotland and a teeny tiny bit in Northern Ireland, nowhere near as much as we'd like to. And so that's where the bulk of our charitable purpose is primarily focused across the UK. However, we have done a bit of work with other countries. So there are some doorstep sports in Malta, and there's a couple of doorstep sports in Kosovo. So just where we found a partner who really wanted to try something different, we have worked with them, yes.
And I guess we've got time for one final question. What is your view on doorstep sport challenging the socioeconomic divide? Is this an initiative that actually brings people from different groups together, as well as providing for those that might not be able to afford access to what might look like traditional sporting routes?
Yeah, and actually that's a really important question. Our focus is to provide sport locally in those areas that have less access. but absolutely to not create any kind of barrier at the doorway, because of course young people will be interacting, or hopefully young people will be interacting with people at school or in other areas of their lives. And the idea that you can go to this club but your friend can't because they have a different postcode would be really anti the ethos that we operate in. So the idea is that anyone can take part, but we want to focus the activity in those bits of the country that have least, and then make sure the doors are open to all.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you for also sharing your contact details at the end of your presentation. I know we have lots of audience members chomping at the bit to get in touch and find out more about each of the initiatives today, so expect your email inbox and your phone to go off the hook this evening. But thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
It's now time for a short interval. We're going to be back in 15 minutes. During the break, you will see some more information about ICOACHKIDS and our resources that will just play in the background. And after the break, we're joined by Juanito Weisensteiner from Australia and Malcolm Brown Mbe. See you all shortly.
Hi again, Coach. Great to see you. After this shower of information, the time has come to get our hands dirty and make it all more practical. If you only learn on paper, you are not going to change children's lives, are you? There are a lot of useful tools and strategies to create a pedagogical climate on the ground. Here, we are going to focus on 4 main strategies. We have to warn you, these strategies may require you to change or adapt some of your old habits. Are you ready for that? Here they come. Strategy 1. Organize and structure your session appropriately. What do a sports field, sports hall, athletics track, ice rink or swimming pool all have in common? They all inspire us to play, perform, run, feel free and let go of our worries. They can make us happy because that's actually one of the original purposes of sport. On the other hand, sport participants also need some structure and clarity of boundaries. This is actually quite important for young participants, or it can quickly descend into total chaos. An appropriate practice structure creates space for all to be free, happy and comfortable during a session. The brakes in a car are what allow the car to go at high speed. Without brakes, the car would crash. Good structure in the sport environment is like the brakes in the car. Without clear rules and a common understanding, there will be chaos and confusion. Kids need to know what's expected of them, what is permitted and what's not, how the activity is supposed to run and what their role is within it, or how long it is meant to last for. Structure gives you grip. You and the children you coach can hang on to it when you need to. Here are some practical tools to set up a positive structure in practice. 1. Have clear expectations of participant behavior. For instance, how do we interact with each other? Or how do we treat the equipment? 2. Agree on key practical issues. What time training starts and finishes, who can take part, and what equipment or attire is required are some examples. 3. Communicate clear rules of engagement for parents. What exactly can you expect from each other? What is their role as a sport parent? They are there to support their child in a positive manner. You, the coach, provide instruction and guide their learning. 4. If any children or parents don't respect the rules, address it as soon as you can. Be consistent and treat everyone fairly. And 5. Lead by example. Follow your own rules. Communicate in an appropriate way. Act professionally in your setting. Don't break the rules. Strategy 2. Provide support and encouragement. Make sure you win. What a bad pass. Run faster. Too many times we hear things like this shouted at kids at sporting venues by coaches and parents. It seems we have the tendency to highlight the things that go wrong. This is a problem. Research shows that placing the focus on the negatives does not lead to improved outcomes. What gets attention will grow, even the negative things. On the other hand, positive support and reinforcement will bring out the best in children. If you compliment kids regularly in your role as a coach, you will enhance fun and raise their self-esteem. And fun and self-esteem will enhance motivation for learning, entering a virtuous cycle. In practical terms, it means that you as a coach should positively support your athletes and make honest and concrete compliments. Be optimistic, motivate and challenge them. Treat everyone with respect. Children will do the same in return. Emphasize development and growth over winning and competition. Help participants be proud of the skills they learn and make sure they know that mistakes are a fundamental part of the learning journey. Would you like some practical tools in this area? Okay, here goes some. 1. Give specific compliments and target effort instead of the results. For instance, fantastic how you tried to get that ball. 2. Focus on the process over the results and execution over outcome. For example, it was great how you served that ball. 3. Value and evidence personal development. For instance, excellent that you asked for the ball so often during this match. Oh, you have proved a lot in this area. 4. Provide task and action-focused feedback, which makes clear what they need to do to improve. For instance, try to gain more speed before the jump. And 5. Try to compliment or say something positive before providing feedback or advice. Try this. I loved the effort on that last play. Next time, try to anticipate the move a bit earlier. Strategy 3. Personal coaching and individual attention. Everyone wants and needs to be seen. Children's development is stimulated when adults pay attention and notice them. They also grow when they feel part of a group. This is true also for the quieter child or the daydreamer. Being unnoticed or neglected can be a very negative experience. That's why it's important to pay attention to each and every child in your group before, during and after sessions and matches. Sometimes a wink or nod is all it takes. Go out of your way to pay attention to the more quiet or shy children, and not only the most skilled or confident ones. This strategy is also important because every child is different. Personality, motivation, and learning preferences may differ. Some children are real go-getters, and others need constant support and encouragement. Adapting your sessions to the development stage of every individual child is difficult. However, as we saw in the SPEC model and the coaching zones in Chapter 4, if you don't, it's a recipe for disaster. Recognizing the difference and trying to adapt and differentiate your sessions to the different individuals pays off big time. How do we do this in practice? 1. Proactively pay positive attention to each and every child in your session. Make sure everyone feels noticed and appreciated. Pay them compliments, make eye contact, call names and generally show an interest. 2. Adapt your coaching, instruction, drills and feedback to the characteristics and developmental stage of every individual child. 3. Appreciate the differences in your group or between your athletes. Let children experience, learn from each other and help each other. 4. Not only appreciate the differences between children, but even positively highlight what every individual child contributes to the group. One is enthusiastic, another has persistent, and a third has technical skills. Show them how this makes the team or group stronger. Strategy 4. Transfer responsibility to the children. Make them responsible for their own development. As a coach, it is very tempting to want to tell your athletes exactly what to do all the time. It gives you a sense of control and direction. However, challenging children to think about drills and sessions will greatly contribute to their development. When you engage athletes in the decision-making process, you enhance self-responsibility for their own development. The child learns to self-reflect. What is my best skill? What do I have to learn in future? And how am I going to achieve that? It is children's nature to try things and practice to get better. So, how can you transfer responsibility in practice? 1. Engage children as much as possible in the organization of the sessions. Ask them to help with the equipment or suggest drills. 2. Create training and competition goals together. 3. Challenge athletes to formulate their own development goals. Make sure the goals are SMART goals. Remember the strategy section in chapter 3. 4. Ask open and higher level questions that lead to deeper thinking and reflection. For instance, tell me how you saw that last shot, rather than what will you do next time? 5. Provide choice in your session, for example, regarding the organization or goals. And 6. Allow athletes to reflect before you offer your feedback. Okay, so that's it. This chapter has provided a lot of ideas and practical tips about creating a pedagogical climate.
Welcome back, and I hope you are ready for more amazing sessions. So here we go with our next presentation. Dr. Juanito Weisensteiner is a Principal Advisor at the New South Wales Office for Sport in Australia and is leading the implementation of the New South Wales Government's Future Champions Strategy. A physiotherapist by background, Juanito was formerly a National Manager of the Athlete Pathways at the Australian Institute of Sport and is an original co-author of the FTEM Athlete Development Framework. Juanito was a co-contributor to the International Olympic Committee's consensus statement on youth athlete development. Through the Futures Champions strategy, Juanito has developed FTEM New South Wales, a systems-level approach and strategy for facilitating effective participant and athlete engagement and development. For this presentation, there will be no question and answer available, but please use the chat function to discuss with other audience members your thoughts. Now, over to Juanito. Thanks, Juanito.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Juanito Weisensteiner and I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to be presenting to you as part of this wonderful ICOACHKIDS International Conference. Over the next 20 minutes, I will be sharing what we're currently doing at a systems level to facilitate healthy talent development in youth sports within Australia and more specifically within the state of New South Wales. As way of background and context, Australia is a country located within the Pacific in the Southern Hemisphere. My home state of New South Wales is highlighted by the circle in the map below, and it's one of 8 states and territories within Australia and has the most population. Sydney is its capital, and that's where I'm based, and you might recognise there next to Sydney our iconic landmark, the Sydney Opera House. Through my current role within the New South Wales Office of Sport, I provide guidance and support across the whole sporting sector within New South Wales. In my role, I also provide guidance and support at all levels of sport. And this graphic here that you see visualises our broad, complex and vibrant sporting landscape. You can see that there are a lot of moving parts within this landscape that are required to be aligned, connected and collaborative in order to effectively support a participant or athlete's development and their progression. Whilst we have a vibrant and committed sector, it's also important to recognise and acknowledge the recognised constraints within the levels of the whole of sport pathway so that we can address them and actually in turn utilise them as opportunities. So what you see here on this slide is a schematic I put together for a book chapter within the 2017 published Routledge International Handbook of Talent ID and Development. And this schematic details in the recognised gaps and constraints, but as I said before, the opportunities within the foundational, the pre-elite and the high performance levels of sport generally. Cognizant of all the recognised gaps and opportunities and the complexity of engaging and aligning our entire New South Wales sporting sector, the Office of Sport developed and launched in late 2019 its Future Champion strategy to better support New South Wales participants and athletes and unite the system now and into the future. Directly informing and guiding the Future Champion strategy is the systems framework FTEM New South Wales. Now, FTEM stands for Foundations, Talent, Elite and Mastery. FTEM New South Wales, that you can see here on the left, this visual, was adapted from the original FTEM framework that my colleagues and I developed at the Australian Institute of Sport in and around 2011-2012. FTEM has been utilised by a number of Australian national sporting organisations to visualise their pathways and to articulate their strategies and practice, including Swimming Australia, and is now adopted extensively within Switzerland and Japan and is supporting Gaelic sports in Ireland. I had the great pleasure in 2014 to present FTEM to the International Olympic Committee as an example of an inclusive and evidence-based framework. And I had the great privilege to be a co-contributor to a consensus statement on youth athlete development that was published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine in 2015. So as you can see here with the graphic of FTEM New South Wales, there's a deliberate complement of levels and strategies to achieve the desired outcome, whether it's to build strong foundations leading to lifelong engagement in sport, or it's about optimising a talent pipeline and giving the best opportunity for our emerging athletes, or it's about succeeding on the world stage at elite and mastery level. So for instance, in the foundational levels, it's a deliberate complement of levels and strategies that provide those progressive building blocks supporting a participant's development and application of physical literacy and sporting skills within sport and active recreation. In the talent levels, again, it's a complement of progressive levels to maximise our talent ID and development and transitional strategies and processes to support our emerging athletes. And then at the elite and mastery level, again, it's a deliberate set of strategies and levels to better prepare our athletes for the world stage, for the top levels of professional support, to support them in and out of sport and after sport. Not only does FTEM New South Wales visualise in a personified way our vibrant sector at all levels, including our wonderful Olympic and Paralympic ambassadors and recent gold medalists Madison De Rosario and Jessica Fox, it's also a great way to ensure everyone within our sector is on the same page, they're aligned, united and recognised. Now FTEM New South Wales, like FTEM, offers some great advantages and it has certain key features to it. So rather than reliant and restricted on chronological age, it actually draws on operationalising global best practice. So what's a best practice approach to achieve the desired outcome for each level, drawing on global evidence. It's also inclusive, catering for all participants, no matter their motivation and goal, their ability, life stage and demographic. It's flexible in application, catering for individual variability in terms of commitment or concurrent participation across different sport formats. It provides a common understanding and language for all supporting stakeholders. It provides visibility of development and opportunities across the life course and the right fit of program and product to support ongoing engagement through sport and active recreation. It's participant-centric and holistic and ecological, that I will touch on in a minute. And importantly, it educates and empowers all supporting stakeholders specific to effective and holistic development. FTM's holistic and ecological philosophy and approach places the participant or athlete at its centre. Healthy talent development in youth sports, no matter the participant's ability, motivation and aspiration, all starts with strong foundations. This was always a key focus of the original FTM framework. Through effective implementation of a best practice and coordinated and aligned approach to participant development, guided by the complement and progression of the FTM foundational levels and its key principles, we can support the participant to acquire, develop, refine and apply their holistic profile within active recreation and sport. This profile is integrated and inclusive of their movement foundations and physical literacy, their physiology and neuromuscular conditioning and coordination, their sporting skills, the integration of components such as perceptual, cognitive, technical and motor skills, their knowledge, positive well-being and engagement, and then importantly, their psychological aptitude, skills and strategies that they can use and learn through application within sport and apply and utilise them in sport, but also through life as well. This is critically important, having such a holistic and integrated profile to support the participants' lifelong physical literacy and competency and confident application and enjoyment within sport and active recreation. To nurture and progress the holistic profile and those integrated competencies of the participant requires the best fit and match of opportunity and experiences at the right time. Surrounding the participant profile on this slide are the complement of recognised and key ingredients for facilitating engaging and positive participant development. These include opportunity to develop a full repertoire of fundamental movement skills and to then develop the full competencies of physical literacy, adequate space and opportunity to enjoy free play, the right fit of structured program and guidance in introductory formats of sport and then full formats of sport, a participant-centric approach to development that's adopted by all stakeholders, the provision of safe and facilitative learning environments and good culture, the encouragement of sport diversification and later specialisation, so sampling a few sports before specialising in a main sport, the right fit of competition format for the participants' motivation, aspiration, but also their ability and their level of maturation. The right stimulus to facilitate their knowledge and their development of early self-regulation. The support of life balance, and then importantly, supporting them through the key transition points in life and developmental milestones to support their ongoing engagement in active recreation and sport. But to ensure sustainable participation outcomes requires the connection and integration of key environmental factors such as positive parental engagement and support, positive club and school engagement, a participant-centric, holistic and ecological approach to coaching, facilitative learning environments that are accessible and engaging, and ready access to quality and inclusive facilities and support providers. Enveloping these key environmental factors and the participant at the centre are the required system level factors. So the match of good policy, funding, effective organisational strategy and implementation and ongoing evidence of impact. It is the effective integration of all these levels at the participant, the environment and system level that is key to a sustainable system strategy and effective implementation and legacy. For emerging athletes who have future high performance aspirations, through the complement and progression of the F10 talent levels, we want to further refine and extend their holistic and integrated profile, as you see here on this slide. This will stand them in good stead to be able to endure that sometimes long and arduous journey as an emerging athlete, and to make the most of the opportunities that come their way through coaching, training, competition, and prepare them adequately for future high performance levels. But again, like the foundational level participant, the emerging athlete can't do it all on their own. So to really nurture their profile, optimise their development, their retention, their progression, their performance, really requires these key opportunities, as you can see surrounding the profile, to be administered at the right time and in the right way. And this is all about, the right opportunity of inclusive and holistic talent selection, about having an athlete-centric and holistic approach to their development, facilitating their learning and application within training and competition, ensuring you have individualised case management of the athlete, you're monitoring them and adapting as you need to ensure that they are progressing and retained, ensuring they have good health and good well-being, and this will support their availability in training and competition. It's also about ensuring they have good sport-life balance, they are strong self-regulators and effective self-managers, they have progressive competition and camp opportunities, and also that there's opportunity for them to vertically be integrated and observe from elite athletes within their daily training environments or within camps. But in the same way that we approach at the foundational levels to ensure sustainable outcomes in the pre-elite levels and to support future high performance outcomes, it's not up to the athlete themselves. They have to be surrounded and supported by the right fit of environmental support and those factors, and also the right fit of system level support and opportunity. That's critically important to really hone and nurture and support that pre-elite athlete at all levels. And this entails at the environmental level, again, the positive engagement and support from their parents, their carers and guardians. It's about the partnership with the state sporting organisations, with their underpinning delivery agents such as schools, with academies, with clubs, ensuring that everyone is on the same page with what they're doing to talent identify, develop and transition these emerging athletes. It's about the right fit of coaching. So again, really about a best practice approach to coaching the athlete in front of you, understanding where they're at in their profile, understanding what their aspiration is, and really adopting an ecological approach to coaching that really nurtures the whole profile of the athlete. It's about understanding peer dynamics in and out of sport and how to manage that effectively. It's about the right fit of facilities and daily training environments for these emerging athletes and promoting accessibility. And it's also about the fit and accessibility of support providers. At the system level, again, like the foundational levels, it's about the right fit of policy, it's about funding, it's about the strategy of the sporting organisation, and then also importantly, learning as we go, that action-based approach to evidence and research, that intelligence that further informs the strategy and delivery and practice. And we are using a mixed but complementary approach to communicate throughout the sector the best practice principles of F10 New South Wales. This includes engaging animation videos, such as on the left here, the Introduction to FTEM New South Wales video that we recently launched on our website, and then through a complement, a suite of system level resources where we provide granularity specific to each FTEM level and provide best practice considerations for operational implementation at a participant, athlete, environmental and system level. So following up on those best practice principles, we wanted to bring them to life. So we wanted to support the whole sector, all those key stakeholders in understanding and applying and operationalising all those best practice considerations within the foundational talent levels. So on this slide, it really shows, I guess, the collective work that we have been doing. So for instance, up the top left, we've been doing a lot of work partnering with our state sporting organisations for them to understand good practice, to use those principles to review what they're doing at a foundational and talent level in regards to their overarching strategies, their processes, the fit of personnel, their prioritisation, but also how they communicate effectively the strategies and get the buy-in, of all the underpinning stakeholders and organisations. On the right, we're doing a lot of work to better engage and educate our coaching workforce. We recognise through the Future Champions strategy that our coaches are critical for the implementation of this strategy. So we're looking at ways that we can better educate, better engage with and support the professional development and retention of our incredible coaching talent. Now here on the right is just an example of a coaching resource that we've put together, but we've also got website resources and we do direct engagement with coaches from within the Office of Sport. On the bottom right, we're doing a lot of work, direct engagement with participants and athletes. That can be face-to-face, it could be online connections with them to share best practice, what key knowledge they need and how they can apply that knowledge to support their development and journey. We recently put out a really cool animation that spoke to the emerging athletes and what they could do at home within the COVID lockdown. And then finally on the bottom left, we've got this wonderful evolving area where we're putting more attention and support for parents. This is an example here of an animation video we've just released called the ABCs for Parents, and it was done in collaboration with very experienced sports psychologist Fiona McCarthy, and it's through messaging like this simple, relatable, personified messaging that's sort of really hitting home and making an impact. But we're also doing direct engagements with parents, and we're supporting state sporting organisations to understand how to better communicate and engage with their parental cohorts. So thank you for joining me on this presentation. It was a real thrill to be able to present to you about the Future Champions strategy, and we're looking forward to the future, and particularly looking forward to when Brisbane, the capital city of Queensland, our sister state, hosts the Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2032. Thank you.
And I certainly hope that some of us will be able to join you in Brisbane when the Olympic Games are there in, what are we on now? 8-9 years' time. That'll be super exciting. Thank you, Juanita, for your insights there. It's currently 6:44 a.m. in Australia, so anyone joining us from that part of the world, I hope your coffee is strong. Thank you for joining us with your breakfast. We'll now head to our first interview of the conference. Now, Malcolm Brown Mbe has evolved from athlete to volunteer coach to employed coach to coach mentor over a period of 50 years. Simultaneously, he has worked full-time in schools, universities, and for British athletics and British triathlon. His specialism is endurance, but informed by speed, skill, and strength. Athletes Malcolm has coached have won 6 Olympic medals and numerous global titles. He has co-founded the Leeds Triathlon Centre in the UK, initiated the Global Coaches House, and facilitated the UK Athletics Talent Hub and National Race Walk Centre in Leeds. Interviewing Malcolm is Professor Sergio Larobiel. Hi, Sergio. Hi, Malcolm.
Yeah. Hi, Malcolm. How are you?
Hello. I'm good, thank you. I'm very good.
Listen, thank you very much, as always, for answering the call of ICOACHKIDS. And as always, a great pleasure to chat to you. I'm very fortunate that happens quite often. So, listen, and I think actually on the back of Juanita's presentation and the systems he described in Australia, I think this is the perfect interview really to go after that presentation, because we're going to be discussing a lot of that. I mean, the main thrust of these interviews around the transition from a promising junior athlete to an Olympic champion. And I know you've coached a large number of athletes over the years, or perhaps the two most famous, these two Yorkshire brothers, Johnny and Ali Brownlee, who have been Olympic champions and world champion multiple times. And we're going to focus on them, if that's okay with you. So Malcolm, please tell me when you first came across Ali and Johnny, and how old were they and what were they like?
I took a new job moved to Leeds as director of sport at the university, and I partly chose the job because I'm a passionate coach, and it had an athletics track and the facilities that I knew I'd be spending my spare time after work, weekends at. And there wasn't much going on. No, I mooched out there and nothing was happening, and there were not many students. And then these two little boys came running across the infield of the athletics track, followed by their guardian, it was their father. And the father said to me, would I be able to get them to run faster? This taller one is Alistair, age 15, but the small one is a soccer player. He's not interested in running or triathlon, or just ignore him, he said. And anyhow, that was Alistair and Johnny, age 15 and 14, I think, at that stage.
And at that point, was there any indication that they could be what they became? Was it clear from day one, or what did you think at the time?
No, it wasn't. Looking back now, I could see that I missed some signs that if I'd been a better coach and more sensitive, I may have picked up. But if we're talking about the traditional talent ID markers, were they the fastest in the country? Were their running times, their swim times, particularly? They weren't. They were in the national squad at that age, a regional squad, sorry, at that age, and then to move to the national. But they weren't the best in those squads. They weren't the best in Britain at that stage in terms of their performances or their times. But as I say, if I look back on it now, if I could have been able to measure the way we can measure how fast somebody can run around a track, their love of the outdoors, their love of training, their work ethic, their resilience, their ability to recover from one session to another, at the age of 15 and 14, I would have had a very different profile of those lads. And it may be that would have shown that they had what it took.
So beyond the traditional markers of how fast, how strong, for you, that the key differentiator between them and others over time were that love of training and love of working hard? Was that what really set them apart?
Yeah, and a genuine love of it, not for extrinsic winning of medals or getting kit or whatever 15-year-olds, it was a real enjoyment of pitting themselves against the environment and against others, and critically, of course, against each other.
And that's a really important point, right? Because I mean, how did they, or how did you manage that kind of fraternal relationship? Was it always positive, or?
It didn't always appear positive, but it was positive. When I say it didn't always appear positive, because there are 3 Brownlees, by the way. There's a third brother who thinks that running around the streets in Lycra is something that no human being should be allowed to do. He has no desire whatsoever. He's a rugby player. But the competitive element between the 2 of them at times boiled over, but it was also a key characteristic that they both had. Alistair wanted to keep Johnny, the younger, in his place, and Johnny wanted to knock Alistair off his perch every day in training, not just in the races. And that was my challenge, was to identify which days that they had permission, as it were, to go for it, and which days they would just cooperate and go for an easy ride, easy run, or easy swim.
So that's interesting that I think Juanita mentioned before, or that you have to coach the athlete in front of you, and you have these 2. Were all those decisions made beforehand, or did you have to be quite flexible and just read the atmosphere in the session and then at times just change tack and go for something else? Or how was that?
Yeah, well, both of those really, Sergio. I mean, clearly, although they were 15 and 40 when they came to me, I was 58. I'd had a lot of coaching. I've been coaching since I was 30 years of age. And I'd coached at the Olympics. I was in the Sydney Olympic stadium that we saw earlier as a track and field coach. And I knew what it took to be a world-class athlete. And so I knew what we were aiming for. I knew what it looked like. I knew what they had to acquire. And I was able to shape the week, if you like, which stretched them, but not too much. But within that, I would always look at them very carefully when they turned up at the training venue and try to judge, because they would never say they were tired. They would never say they wanted to amend the training session. But I tried to find other indicators of their state of readiness to train.
I mean, it's really really interesting what you say about by the time you started coaching them, you have been doing this for a while. Okay.
Yeah.
What mistakes you think you would have made if you had met these boys 30 years before? Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, I've only ever coached 3 athletes under the age of 18, Alistair and Johnny, and the first lad I coached when I was a school teacher. So I do not pretend to have any insight here into ICOACHKIDS. I think you've got me here on totally false pretenses. But I think the errors I made earlier were that when I had a talented athlete who was starting to do exceptional things, like Alistair and Johnny did, in the past, I got a little bit too excited by it as a coach. Instead of taking a long-term view, I might be, well, you've just done really well in that race, which gets you into another race. So let's snatch at that opportunity. Let's grab. I always took really a 4-year view that this was around qualifying for the Olympics, and so the horizons were longer when I was 58 in the way I planned than they were when I was a younger coach.
So the main takeaway there is take your time, think long term when you're working with young athletes. Okay, yeah. We use a phrase sometimes that turning the temperature of the oven up is not gonna bake the cake; it's gonna burn it.
Yeah. But I have to say, there was also, in contradiction to that, and the paradox is that I'd also done a study on endurance athletes. And at the time, the Africans were coming to the fore. And I also had a view on you couldn't spend too long getting to the top. I think the under 23 age group, which many sports have, had done no favors for European endurance athletes. It was a comfort blanket. So to cut a long story short, we did accelerate some of the training, but not the racing.
I knew time was going to fly really quick. I've got one very quick last question before we hand back over to Gary to see if there's any questions from the audience.
Yeah.
But if you take their journey from promising athlete to Olympic champion as a whole, what would you say is your biggest eureka moment throughout that journey?
The eureka philosophic point for me really is, looking back on it, is that it's very hard to predict 1 year what athletes are going to achieve in 1 year's time, let alone 4 years' time. And I would make a plea for keeping open inclusivity and not selecting too early, too young in any sport at any time, because children mature at very different rates, psychologically as well as physically and physiologically. And 1 year out, we can't tell who the Olympic team's going to be. So how on earth can we predict what a 15-year-old's going to be like in 2 years' time?
That's a very, very clear message to everybody watching this today. Malcolm, thanks a million from me. I'm going to hand over to Gary because I'm sure there are some questions from the audience.
Malcolm, some amazingly fascinating insights there. Thank you for sharing those with us. And thank you for chatting with Sergio. We have a couple of questions from our audience. First of all, from Peter, who has asked, did you use different motivational strategies for them individually, for Johnny and Ali, that is, or more as a team of brothers?
Yeah, I always felt I was coaching 3 athletes when I was coaching those 2 athletes. There was Alistair, there was Johnny, and then there was a pair, if you see what I mean, that had to be coached as well. And I guess whoever looked after the Serena and Venus may have had similar problems, but I never consulted. So yes, Alistair's the older brother. He has they're very different individuals. So there is very different motivations. You know, one of them needs a lot of confidence building and development in that regard. The other one needs to be made aware that there are threats and hazards on the path, and they can't just ignore them. You know, so yes, they were. Although they're brothers, they were very different emotional, physiological, psychological beings.
And I guess we have time for one more question, and this is a question from Stuart, who is asking, did the boys have an Olympic mindset when they first arrived, or is this something that had to be nurtured and developed over time?
They were very easily persuaded into an Olympic mindset. The sport didn't. The sport in Britain had a mindset of, it doesn't matter how you did in this last race because there's always another one in 14 days' time. You know, I try to inculcate the idea that only do the races that matter and then die trying to win it. And then recover, and then worry about what happens after that. So I had very much a sort of track and field mindset where, you know, there's one big race of the year and there was a qualifier, 2 races perhaps per year. Whereas the general feel in triathlon at the time in the UK was very different from that. but they were very suggestible to that. You know, they fell into that way of thinking, you know, without, they were the two, I must have coached 100 athletes, and they were the two easiest. The others were the difficult ones.
And I'm sure some of them did quite okay as well, did they?
Yeah, they did. They did. But Alistair and John turned up, loved it, did it. Created problems elsewhere, no doubt, but that was fine.
And I think, and one of our pledge items, right, which we're going to talk about in tomorrow, is about developing that love for sport as well as learning the sport. And,
Yeah.
and the fact that they brought that love with them seems so powerful to the stories that you're telling.
Tribute to their parents, their family background, how they brought them up. Also, I think it's really important to say that I fundamentally believe in dual careers, and Alistair's got 2 Olympic gold medals and at the same time 2 academic degrees, university degrees, and Johnny's. And I feel that by doing that, you gave them the comfort of knowing that if it didn't all work out, they could go off into the world of work with a great CV behind them and compete with anybody else who hadn't been a sports person. And I think that psychological security of having qualifications is critical. And I've spent my life trying to persuade people of that. And I think people are coming around to a way of thinking now.
And what a fantastic thing to kind of close on there about creating psychological security for our athletes, and that can be so important at all levels of sport. Malcolm, thank you so much for your time this evening. Your insights are so incredible. We hope that we can catch up again with you soon.
It's been a pleasure. I always learn when I listen to Sergio. Even the questions they've got more than one answer.
Same when I speak to him too. Thanks, Malcolm. It's now time for another short interval, and this time we will be back in 10 minutes. After the break, we'll be joined by Anne Tivas, OBE of Safe Sport International, and to finish off the day, we will be joined by Roberto Martinez, the manager of the Belgian national men's football team. See you all soon.
Kids are made to play, and getting kids moving is more important than ever, with only 1 in 5 getting their recommended daily activity levels. When kids move, their health, social skills, academic performance, and mental well-being can improve significantly.
In fact, positive experiences with sport are key, and this is where coaches can make all the difference. Through Nike's Made to Play commitment and partnership with ICOACHKIDS, we're here to support you in giving the kids the best introduction to sport and activity.
Our 5 chapters will show you basic coaching skills and give you some very practical knowledge and ideas. So let's get coaching.
The framework contains 5 different types of activity to help create and deliver inclusive sport sessions. Let's remind ourselves what they were. The first one, open activities. Second, modified activities. Third, parallel activities. Fourth, separate activities. And finally, 5th, disability sport activities. When we talked about modified activities, we introduced the simple adaptation tool that can aid modification in any part of the spectrum. The STEP model is a very simple tool, and I guarantee you, if you haven't seen it before, it will have a before and after effect on your coaching. The acronym STEP represents elements of activities that we can modify to help make activities more inclusive. S is for space, T is for task, E is for equipment, and then P is for people. Variations of each of these elements will make activities easier or harder, thus allowing the coach to fine-tune the activities, making sure that it's pitched at the right level for all participants so that they can enjoy and improve in equal measure. Let's cover them one by one. Space. Space can be modified in many ways. For example, by increasing or decreasing the playing area depending on the mobility of the participants, or by varying the distance between targets. T, task. Task can be varied in many ways. For example, by trying different ways to perform the same task, such as throwing a ball underarm, overarm, or with both hands, or breaking down the skill into smaller component parts. E then is for equipment. Equipment can be modified in a multitude of ways. For example, by using different size balls and allowing participants to use the ball that best suits them, or sound assistant balls for players who have difficulty tracking the movement of a ball. And finally, people. People can be organised in different ways to support inclusive practice. For example, match players of similar abilities in small-sided or close marking activities. Or balance team games by playing teams of unequal players, where a few players with higher abilities can play against a bigger team still developing their abilities. What do you think? Hopefully it will be useful. Now, the beauty of STEP is that in addition to being used to promote inclusion, it can also be used in your regular coaching sessions. It can serve the purpose of modifying or conditioning activities and games to exaggerate certain situations or encourage participants to perform certain technical skills or to find tactical solutions to particular problems. For instance, imagine a typical game of roundo in football, where a team of players is passing the ball whilst the other team of players is trying to take the ball off them. For instance, by changing the space, making it smaller, you would force the players to improve the quickness of their decision making and the accuracy of their passing and receiving, because the margin of error would be much smaller. In terms of task, by allowing the team in possession to move between spots, you encourage them to get a better understanding of space and timing. As for equipment, by making the ball smaller or harder, you would encourage better ball control. And finally, by giving the defensive team more players, you would be promoting quickness and accuracy in the offensive team. What do you think, Coach? A useful tool indeed. That was the STEP model, part of the Inclusion Spectrum Framework. These tools will help you create and deliver inclusive activities where all participants can thrive. Remember, the principles are not restricted to assisting the inclusion of young people who have special needs or a disability, but can be used to improve opportunities for all participants at their appropriate level. Thank you for watching.
Welcome back to the 5th annual ICOACHKIDS conference. Now let's crack on with a presentation from another expert speaker. Antivas OBE has spent 40 years in child and adult protection work, specialising in sport for 20 years. She is chair of the UK-based international charity Safe Sport International and the former director of the NSPCC Child Protection in Sport Unit in the UK. Safe Sport International supports the capacity of sport to safeguard and protect all of its stakeholders, particularly athletes. Anne is a Programme Director of the International Olympic Committee's Safeguarding Officer Certificate course, and she represents Safe Sport International on the Centre for Sport and Human Rights Advisory Council, FIFA's Expert Safeguarding Group, and the ICOACHKIDS Global Movement Committee. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Good evening, Anne.
Thanks very much, Gary. Thanks for that introduction. It can't possibly be 40 years. I'm relying on the Clarins to keep things going. This is a whistle-stop tour. We only have 20 minutes really to try and go through the key priorities that we see for safe sport for the next 10 years. So I'll move on without further ado. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Safe Sport International for those of you who might not be familiar with what we do and how we work in partnership with others such as Sergio and the ICOACHKIDS programme. And then we're going to look at what the current issues and priorities are, both in terms of policy, practice and research. And finally, we'll have a look at those priorities and see what the solutions may be, the ones that are emerging now and what we may see for the future. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Safe Sport International, we are a UK-based international charity. Our job really is to help sport improve its capacity to make sure that everybody understands what safeguarding is about and understands what to do, whether they're a board member, a coach or an athlete. And we focus on 3 key areas of work in terms of capacity building. Firstly, it's the athlete voice, which is particularly important to us. We have a mantra which is nothing about us without us. And so we seek to ensure that athletes' voices, whether they're young people's voices or adult athletes' voices, are centred in all of the work that we do. We focus on research and evidence. We have a research committee which coordinates work in this area. And we have an education, training and consultancy committee. And that's particularly the latter two. We have a lot of crossover with the work that's being done through ICOACHKIDS. So in terms of our organisation, this is the front of our website and it gives you just a flavour of some of the things that we might be doing currently. So for example, we're promoting the International Safeguards for Children in Sport and its website that launched this week. There are several hundred organisations now committing to take action to safeguard children in sport. We've also partnered on the iProtect programme, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later, which is a whole club approach to safeguarding. And also we're promoting upcoming events and we hope that you'll all join us at our next virtual conference in April next year. So we also made a call to action at our conference in April and in March, this year. Our conference in March focused entirely on athlete voice. And we had athletes presenting, comparing, sharing their research, and generally helping us all to model what an athlete voice being centred looks like. And we made this call to action, which I think is really important to reflect on. And again, we're talking about athletes of all ages, including children. Firstly, it's to see athletes as human beings first, to respect their rights, their voices, their perspectives, and to co-design safeguarding strategies with them. To start with those who are not yet visible, not yet included, and not yet heard, and in this way design from the margins in. That's really, really important to us. If you design a system just for the mainstream, it won't protect everybody. It will fail to protect everybody. But if you design from the margins in, you will then ensure that you safeguard everyone. And the other thing that we're working really hard on at the moment is creating this athlete network and coalition. Again, making sure that athletes are involved in everything that we do. We're building on the work that the athletes did at our conference to ensure that we can create an athlete committee and also find ways in which athletes can be involved at whatever level is suitable for them. So in terms of current trends and priorities, what are we seeing? So that involvement of the athlete voice, I think all of you will have seen recently, there's been a much greater movement of athletes starting to speak up for their rights, to talk about the issues that are important for them, including things like their mental health, and to involve people with lived experience of abuse in sport. They are the experts. It's really, really important that we hear the voices of athletes who experienced abuse as childhood, because they can tell us exactly what it is that we need to do to make things better for them and to improve the experience of other children. For example, we did focus groups earlier in the year with athletes, and all of them told us that when they were children, they didn't know that they had any rights. Nobody ever explained to them what their rights might be in sport and how those rights could be realised. So we're also very, very keen on an evidence-based approach and having a greater emphasis on research, whether that's about the extent of abuse in sport, whether it's about the incidents, and also applied research. So we want things to be really, really practical and usable for people. So capacity building, both within and outside of sport, and that means bringing together people from different organisations to all work in the same direction rather than working separately. So bringing statutory agencies, child rights organisations, specialist survivor organisations, coaches, educators, and board members all thinking in the same direction. And some of the things that we're noticing at the moment is that there is a growth in the number of safe sport entities, and these come from a variety of different models, and I'll explain those to you in a moment. We need to see much better systems for readiness, response and remedy for people reporting concerns. And that's for all of us. We all need to understand that if we're seeing a child in difficulty, that we all need to have confidence in that moment to know exactly how to respond and what to do and who to talk to. But also our systems need to be better to manage those situations much better with fair systems for everybody concerned, whether they're the person reporting a concern or the person who's had an accusation made against them. The other thing that's really important is that governance is improved. Safeguarding should be at the top of every organisation's risk registers, and we need to make sure that we're having risk assessments done for all of our activities so that we can make sure that we have the best possible environments for our young athletes to participate in. And that also means that we need to look at working better between sport and statutory agencies to make sure that we understand each other's roles and responsibilities and work more closely together. And one of the things that also we need to do is one of the things that Safe Sport International is working on at the moment is to create international safeguards which are inclusive of everyone. At the moment, there are some good models of international safeguards for children in sport, but there's a big gap there in terms of safeguards for adults. There's only a few countries in the world that are taking action in that way. And that poses particular issues, particularly for talented young athletes who start to move up the pathway and start to move into adult sport. So we do need to make sure that we develop those inclusive safeguards and make sure everybody has a positive experience. So in terms of education and training, these are some of the things that we're starting to see. Over the last 2 years, nearly all training and education has been online, and that's also had some positives because it's made the ability to access training much more inclusive and accessible. We've seen massive developments with ICOACHKIDS, and I really commend you for the fantastic work that you've been doing and that you're continuing to expand that movement globally now, following the success of the European project. And one of the things that we've worked on together is the iProtect programme, which is a whole club approach to safeguarding education and training. And the ICOACHKIDS programme is actually embedded within that programme. And we'll be looking to see for the future how we can expand and improve to make sure that there is continuous professional development within that programme. The other thing that's happening that's really, really important is safeguarding officer designated persons training. And that means having safeguarding officers in clubs, for events, at national level and at international level. And we're starting to see some high quality training coming out that supports that internationally. At the moment, UNICEF is trying to help us with, they've commissioned a piece of work which is looking at how we can have a consistent programme for safeguarding officers and a framework that explains what the knowledge, skills and competencies are. I'm a programme director on the IOC Safeguarding Officer course, and one of the things that we've ensured that is included in this brand new course this year is that athletes speak in every single module, and they also speak at the end of every module to summarise why their voice is so important. And the FIFA Guardians programme is a free online programme which has started with a basic safeguarding awareness course and now is developing the modules for the rest of the safeguarding officer role. And also we're seeing a really, really important shift in the need for board training to make sure that your boards are behind you and supporting the need to make sure that education and training is available to everybody in sport. Okay, so here are some of the examples. Obviously, you're all very familiar with the ICOACHKIDS programme, and safeguarding is thoroughly embedded in that. And Sergio and I work on each other's boards and committees to make sure that we're joining up the dots and meeting the needs of our stakeholders. The Child Safeguarding in Sport programme, which is a current European programme, but the resources are available to everybody. We've been working with 6 countries to develop a whole country approach to safeguarding, and that includes the development of education and training, codes of conduct, but starting from a kind of government level and ministerial model and then working down. All of the resources are available on the Child Safeguarding in Sport website. It's the European Commission and Council of Europe EPAS programme, so I would really commend you to have a look at that if you're looking at a whole system approach in your country. And the iProtect in Sport programme, as I've mentioned, is really, really important. There's no other programme at the moment where everybody, whether they're coaches, safeguarding officers, parents, or young people themselves, have the opportunity to access online learning together as a whole club and make a difference as a whole club. And we've just seen the launch of the new Safe in Sports website. I chair the advisory group for the International Safeguards for Children in Sport. And if you're not familiar with them, they're available in about 20 languages. The new website is now launched and will be continuing to develop. So if you want to make a commitment to know what you should be doing in terms of keeping children safe in your sports organisation, there's loads of guidance and information and help on the website. So thoroughly commend you to be signposted to that if you haven't seen it already. So the other things that we're seeing and the priorities for the future are to create safe systems. We don't have an equivalent of WADA and a model across the world for how safeguarding should be responded to. So what we have now is a really mixed model where we have organisations like the US Safe Sports Centre, which has very specific regulatory requirements that are enshrined within legislation, and they are tasked with dealing with cases for all of the Olympic and Paralympic sports in the States. We have others that are just focusing on managing reported concerns. They may be specialist services like the Sport Resolutions Safeguarding Service in the UK, or the newly formed Canadian service, which is being provided through their Sports Dispute Resolution Panel. And then we have organisations like those in the United Kingdom, like the Child Protection in Sport Unit and the Anne Craft Trust, that focus very much on capacity building and support. And some of these are based within sport organisations, some of them are based outside, and some of them are providing services into sport. But what we should expect to see in the next few years is a growth in these movements and services being provided across the world. There's a real push towards having coordinating bodies that bring in some independence as well, both to capacity building and decision making. I don't think we have a single perfect model in the world at the moment, and things are being created for different reasons in different countries. But do watch out and see what's happening in your country. So these are just some of the examples, and you can look at these, and the slides will be shared with you. You can look at them at your leisure, but these are some of the many examples of different sport entities happening across the world. We've just heard that FIFA are announcing the outcome of their consultation programme and are looking to develop an emerging system that will deal with the really urgent needs to address concerns across the world where there are no systems in place. Okay, I've just been reminded that I'm running over. So other things we're seeing is that sport is increasingly being caught up in statutory agency reviews and commissions, but also increasingly where cases, safeguarding cases do arise within sport, they are being subject to internal inquiries as well. And these are just some of the current and recent examples. Just highlighting again the athlete voice. So increasingly we're seeing the athlete voice reflected in media coverage around the world, and we know that safeguarding cases are happening all over the world. We're also now seeing a mobilisation of athlete voice and advocacy centres, and again you can look these up at your leisure. And we're also, as I said, creating an athlete voice committee, and ensuring that athletes are represented in all of our work. There's a fantastic new piece of research that's come out which talks about the prevalence of abuse in sport, but it's also comparing it with abuse outside of sport. And this is looking at 6 European countries. It's a fantastic piece of research led by Edge Hill University, but involving all 6 countries and World Athletics and UK Athletics. So again, I would commend you to have a look at that research to be up to date in your thinking. We have new networks emerging, such as the International Research Network on Violence in Sport, coordinated from Belgium, our own research committee, Edge Hill University's Centre for Child Protection and Safeguarding in Sport, and the Masters in Sport Integrity at the University of Leuven. Come together and hear more about these next April. We really welcome all of you coming and joining us. That coaching will be represented, we hope, across all of the strands of the conference. So please come and register for the Safe Sport International Conference, and our contact details are available for you on social media and through our website. So that's it from me. I'll welcome if there have been any questions, and apologies for overrunning.
And there's no need to apologise at all. Thank you so much for sharing such important messages, initiatives, and organisational work that is going on worldwide. And yet again, such a reminder of the importance of the athlete's voice being heard too. I guess we have time for one question. You spoke about the importance of co-designing safeguarding strategies. What do, or even what can these conversations look like? And what would your recommendations be for clubs and youth sport organisations starting these conversations?
Okay, so there's some really good practice guidance out there from organisations like Voices, Truth and Dignity. They produce guidance on how to involve athletes who've been affected by abuse in the past. It gives you lots of helpful information and tips. A lot of it, athletes will just say, ask us, invite us, and we'll contribute. We're really, really keen to contribute with you and take your lead from what the athletes say is important for them. But that doesn't matter whether it's young people or whether it's older people. A really good example, for example, is the Lawn Tennis Association in the UK is just starting to create young safeguarding officer roles, because they've realised that actually young people are much more likely to talk to their peers than they are to us old fogies. I speak for myself. So asking and looking at what good practice ideas there are out there. The Child Protection in Sport unit in the UK has got some free e-learning on its website about how to involve children and young people. So the CPSU website is a really, really helpful set of resources.
Thanks, Anne. And just a reminder to our audience members of some of the links that Anne shared there. So there is thecpsu.org.uk, there is safeinsport.org, and there is safesportinternational.com. Please be sure to check out all of those resources and insights that Anne alluded to today. For now, Anne, thank you for sharing your evening with us. I'm sure we'll be catching up soon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And now on to our final session of the day. We're extremely privileged to host an interview with the manager of the Belgium men's national football team, Roberto Martinez. Roberto is a Spanish football coach and former professional football player. Following a 16-year professional playing career in Spain, England and Scotland, Roberto managed 3 football clubs in England: Swansea City in England's second tier, and Everton and Wigan Athletic in the Premier League. At the latter in 2013, Roberto led his team to FA Cup glory, beating Manchester City 1-0 in the final at Wembley Stadium. Since club management, Roberto has become the manager of Belgium men's national football team, who have finished 3rd place in the 2018 FIFA World Cup and currently occupy the #1 place in the FIFA World Rankings. For this session, there will be no question and answer available, but please use the chat function to discuss with other audience members. But now over to ICOACHKIDS founding member, Chris van der Hagen, to conduct the interview. Over to you, Chris.
So first of all, thank you, Roberto, for taking the time for this interview.
Pleasure.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of sport as a child?
Well, I was very fortunate to be born in a football family. My dad was mad about the game. He played football. He was born in Zaragoza and then he moved to my hometown. And then he settled there, but he was a manager in the local teams, and that was my activity on Sunday. I would follow him. I would be the club mascot, the team mascot. Anything I remember has been in a dressing room. And from the age of 2 years old, it was the activity in the morning, kicking a football and maybe feeling that I loved just that environment and that action.
So it was from the very beginning, with the genes, you were linked to sport?
Yeah, I don't think I had a choice. It was an activity that I truly, obviously I have to blame my dad, but it was a natural thing. It felt really good. I wanted to be involved in football at the moment that I had those weekends with him.
Okay. Who had the biggest impact on you and your experience of sport as a child?
I would say that obviously my mom and my sister, they were always doing sports. My sister played basketball, so in the family we had that. But my dad, what he always shocked me is that he would do things perfect. Anything that he had to do with the sport, he was always fair, he was always honest, always respectful, but he wanted to win and he would prepare everything down to detail. When he was the coach of amateur sides, for him it was like coaching Real Madrid, Barcelona or the Red Devils. Everything had to be really in pristine condition. And he would just start talking to me at a very young age about tactics and partnerships and numerical advantages, which is something that developed that love for what you do. And you realize that wasn't just a sport, it was just a passion and a way of living. That's what I've learned. If you do a sport, it needs to be full of enjoyment and it needs to be a passion of yours.
Yeah, you talked about competition, so that your dad, he was really thinking about how can we win it. So competition it's also a risk of going into the more, like I say, too competitive.
Yeah, I think any extreme is unhealthy. I do feel that I love sport with a competitive nature. I found it very difficult to go and do a 5 miles run unless I do a time to beat. Sometimes competition doesn't need to be with another player or another person. It can be with yourself and the standards that you set. But the meaning of the sport is that you can become better, and unless you measure it, you cannot become better. How do you measure it? Well, you can lose a game, try to win, try to become better, try to do things quicker, try to do things. It's almost like playing golf. You want to get closer to that hole. This is a real choice. Me personally, I had to have that competitive side, but not to be unhealthy. Yeah. You need to understand that you need to sometimes lose and experience losing in order to become better, and that's part of it. I think doing sport, you need to find a way to enjoy competition.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really the positive way of competing. Of course, you have been involved in professional sport now for more than 30 years. So, what have been the big changes or evolutions in youth talent development?
I would say in the environment that you create. I think before, when I started, it was almost you expected to be told what to do, and you had no way to answer back, and your opinion wasn't taken in consideration, and it was a generation that you were told to do what they told you. That's it. I've seen that a big change. What he hasn't changed in football is 11 against 11. The sizes is everything the same. The skill on the pitch, the love for a good action, that hasn't changed. But I've seen that now you need to be a bit more understanding of the new generation. The new generation very rarely accepts criticism. You have to be very, very aware of how you try to correct a bad action. And then you see that the new generation doesn't play on the outside as much as they used to do. Now there's more screens, there's a lot of digital action in their learning, and I think you need to adjust. And as a coach, you can't fight that a young person will have a screen in their lives. You need to use it in your advantage. Try to take videos, try to put that content. You can affect the content that they have in those tablets. And then it's the relationship. It needs to be both ways. It needs to be filled with a respect of relationship, and you need to be able to listen. And that will be the biggest change that I've seen over the last 30 years in football development, is that the relationship between the coach and the young participants.
And what about the consistencies over this long period? The same things that really stay the same?
When the natural talented player likes to work less, and the ones that they are less talented, they like to work harder. That doesn't change. And ideally, talent without work, I don't think it beats the hard work without talent. And I think it's trying always to allow the naturally talented individual to understand football, that is a team sport. So you need to be aware of the others, use the others for you to be able to become better, and the other way around. The hard-working players, you need to try to be more calm, more composed, and try to look at the skill of that action, and that stayed the same, totally the same.
Thank you. So, given your experience as a football manager in clubs like Swansea City, Wigan Athletic and Everton, what are your expectations of coaches working with younger players?
I think it's just to develop a real enjoyment, a real passion. When I look at a player or a young player, that you see that they got a real love for the game. It seems that they are more prepared to face adversity. Any career of any young player that he wants to become a professional, you will get a lot of setbacks, and it's how you react to those. And I feel that when you have a player, a young player, that you develop that love for the game, is almost, you accept it. There will be setbacks, and you want to get up and just get better. When you see that sometimes the relationship between the young player and the sport and the football in this case is not a love relationship, it's almost sometimes you happy to just give up at the first time that it gets tough. And then you understand that sometimes we got young players that they are there because the parents want them to be there, rather than him being in love. And I think as a young coach or a coach of young players, you need to develop that real interrogation of why you're there as a young person, and how can you develop that love for the game, and why do you love the game, and work at it, because that will prepare you indirectly for being an adult in the sport.
Okay. We made the transition to your current role in the Belgian national team. You have given international debuts to young players like Yuri Tillemans at age 19, Jeremy Doku at age 18, Timothy Castagna at age 22 and Sami Lokonga at age 21. How do you track and integrate these young players into a squad with experienced internationals like Romelu Lukaku, Kevin De Bruyne, Eden Hazard and Thibaut Courtois?
Well, I think it's easy for a coach to integrate young players, very easy. Now, to make them successful, it's not down to the coach. It's down to creating an environment where the experienced players are going to accept the young players to come in. And I think that's a big advantage that we have. We have incredible, talented, experienced players, but they want to share and they want to bring new players into the environment. And that's been the real success of the players that you mentioned, that at a very young age, without experience at international level, they were made feel comfortable. And the way I track all the young players is I always look for that outstanding quality. You never look if they are ready. There's a lot of talk about the Finnish article. Football is not perfect. You never fully finished. It's impossible to be perfect at everything. What you could do is to be very, very good at something. And if you're very, very good at something, you can use it in the structure of a team. So when you're mentioning Jeremy Doku, we needed someone that he could take people on, and that will be one situation. Jeremy was ready to do that. Obviously, with the help of the experienced players around him, he was able to start a game, one of the most important games that we had in the last year against Italy in the Euros. You got a player like Yuri Tillemans that if he wants to be a playmaker, always offers himself to the ball, technically very gifted to play short, to play long. Again, that outstanding quality was there at a very young age. And then it's providing the right environment for that outstanding quality to be accepted. And as a coach, you need to make sure that the team is balanced.
It's ready.
By fitting all those outstanding qualities.
Yeah, you made a point about the individual and try to find the right place in that collective, in that team environment. To have the connection with your outstanding quality that you fit in the team environment.
Yes, I think obviously is the easiest fit is when there is a need in the team. When you've got a need, then you can find a youngster that can provide that. It's harder when you've got a youngster that is showing good moments and good signs at club level. And from the outside you feel, well, he's ready for international football, but maybe what he can do, you got another 2 players that they've been doing it for 50 games at international level. So sometimes the easy integration of a young player into an experienced environment is finding a need in that experienced environment, and that allows the fitting to be very natural.
Okay, yeah, thank you. My last question. ICOACHKIDS or movement aims for every child to have access to a positive sport environment that fosters a love for sport, play and physical activity. What would be your top tip to help coaches to achieve this?
Try to understand the person that you have in front of you, the person that you're coaching. Try to understand that person. Try to understand why he's there. Is he there because he's forced to be there? Is that because of his the choice? How can you always connect with that individual? And then use the excuse of the sport, in this case of football, to get to know each other. And sometimes it's only that connection happens when the person sees the coach as someone that is helping you to achieve what you want to achieve. You could play sport to become healthier. Well, if as a coach you could give him a little tip to drink good water after the session, and that would strengthen that relationship. A young person plays football because he wants to become a professional one day and play for the Red Devils. Well, you could give him videos of what Eden Hazard is doing, or just go and watch a game together. I think getting that connection becomes from the relationship of knowing why that young person is playing the sport, and then help that person to reach his or her dreams. And I think that connection is what it makes the love for the game a lot stronger.
Yeah. And I think it's like you say, when the love of the game is there, it's easier to learn.
Totally.
To learn the game.
I think you open up to be a coach. I think the coachability and if you're a coach, you're going to be a good coach if the person that you're coaching wants to be coached. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to get in. So I think you need to connect at the human level. And the way to connect to a human level is to show that as a coach you can help that person to reach the reason why it's there. If it's to make friends. Any reason is valuable. It's not. It doesn't need to be just to become professional or to be the best in the group. It doesn't. It can be for many reasons. Sometimes it could be to switch off from being in a difficult environment at home, which happens. I think that's the real power of the coach, to understand the member that you have in your team, and then just in a human level help that person to love their sport.
To love and to enjoy not only your training sessions, but also as the relationships with your teammates, with your coach, with the whole football community.
Yes, no, that is a wonderful role, to be the coach and being able to assess how you can bring happiness to the people in that environment. But it is true that knowing the reason why that person is there will help the coach to fulfill the love for the sport, and from that point you're reaching a new level of learning when you are open, when you're loving what you're doing, when you see that that's a purpose because you're going to tick your box. No, everyone has the same meaning of wanting to be doing sport. Sometimes it's health reasons, sometimes I want to win. It's not wanting to win, as long as you do it in a respectful manner and you can control your emotions. Sometimes it's because you want to improve of what you do. Sometimes it's because you want to get to know other people, you want to practice a language. Anything is a good reason, but I think that relationship would help the coach if you know the reason why that person is there and developing that towards the dream of that person.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for sharing your ideas with the big audience of our online conference. I'm sure that they will be very happy to learn from one of the best coaches in the world. So, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. What an amazing interview. And thank you to Roberto Martinez for sharing. And also thank you to Chris van der Hagen and the Royal Belgian Football Association, one of our founding partners, for their facilitation. Just some more reminders there from the theme of the day around connecting with individuals and players and athletes as people, getting to know them on a human level, ensuring that the athlete's voice is heard and is listened to. And finally, to help young people develop a love for sport as well as learning sport. That brings a close to the first day of the ICOACHKIDS 5th International Conference. I'm sure you'll all agree that our panelists have done an incredible job of sharing their expertise. And now it's over to you. Please share on social media at ICOACHKIDSWorld your reflections using hashtag ICOACHKIDS. We will be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. UK time with sessions from even more experts, including Nicole Lavoie of the Tucker Centre for Research on Girls and Women in Sport, Tabo Huntley, Jordan Lee, Phil Kearney, and the ICOACHKIDS founding partners. We look forward to seeing you there. Have a great evening, afternoon, morning, or day, wherever you are. Take care.